Attack during the feast, the Emperor falls. Hello guys, welcome back to our anime explainer. Guys, please like the video and subscribe to my channel. Today is explanation of Soul Land 2 Peerless Tang Men based on novel. So let's start. Huo Yuhao paused for a while before saying, "I hope you will keep your promise." Even though Juzi could not see Huo Yuhao, she seemed to be gazing into the distance at this moment. She answered, "I will." Huo Yuhao replied, "Then we have an agreement." Xu Qianran had been very anxious for the past few days. After the plan, which he had believed was perfect, had failed, he had been in a foul mood. Right now, all of the higher class fighting power had been deployed to defend the temporary palace. As one became more powerful, one usually valued his or her life a lot more. That was the reason why many emperors tend to seek ways to acquire immortality after aging. Xu Qianran was very afraid of death. He wanted to become the first emperor to unite the entire continent. This was something he believed he had to do. Hence, he felt that he must not die. Even though his Class 9 soul engineers, including Elder Kong, had tried to persuade him with their analysis that the two ultimate Doluo had a near-zero chance of survival, Xu Qianran could not help but worry. He was worried that the two ultimate Doluo might still have a breath or two in them, and would be able to take him out with their final blow. Hence, he felt that there was a need for him to reinforce his defenses at all costs. He needed to guard against this possibility. It was of the utmost importance for him to survive in order to become the first emperor in history to conquer the entire Doluo continent. It was clear how anxious he was from the fact that he wore his human-shaped soul tool to sleep. On top of that, he made sure that his 11 Class 9 soul tools stayed on his body at all costs. There would be at least 6 Class 9 soul engineers guarding him at any time of the day. In addition, he had never left the temporary palace for the past few days. He seemed to have become overly cautious about everything. He had no idea how long he had to stay in this state. After all, there was no news about the two ultimate Doluo. The absence of news and information simply made him more worried. "Your Majesty, your meal is ready. Your guests have also arrived." A servant politely informed Xu Qianran. "Okay." Xu Qianran nodded and lifted the visor covering his face. He walked out of his room and entered the dining hall. Xu Qianran was so paranoid that he had placed several small protective soul barriers around the dining hall, just in case. The 6 Class 9 soul engineers had actually arrived for a while already. Other than dining with Xu Qianran, they were supposed to protect him. Of course, all of them believed that they were actually just there to reassure him that everything would be all right. After all, they believed that the two ultimate Doluo could not have survived those explosions. However, no one dared to let Xu Qianran know that he was paranoid. The reason was that Xu Qianran had already killed more than 10 servants who had told him that. "Come on, make yourselves at home. Let's dig in." Xu Qianran's words contrasted against the expression on his face. Even though there was a huge variety of incredible delicacies, he was definitely not in the mood for good food. Even though the 6 Class 9 soul engineers kept silent, they helped themselves to the food before them. Eating with a paranoid emperor was not something which would be enjoyable for anyone. They only wanted to leave as soon as possible once they were done with their meal. After all, a Class 9 soul engineer led a very busy life. They had to make soul tools, test soul tools, design soul tools, and handle all sorts of administrative matters. After having a few cups of wine, Xu Qianran became a lot less tense. Perhaps it was because of his age and increased political power that he had started to like alcohol. In fact, he had been asking for wine to help him with his sleep. Once again, the servant stepped forward to refill Xu Qianran's cup. Xu Qianran raised the cup as he flashed a smile. "Come, let's drink together, and hope that our army will be able to conquer the last two empires and unite the entire continent. Cheers!" The 6 Class 9 soul engineers did not dare to disobey the emperor, as they exclaimed in unison. After seeing how cooperative they were, Xu Qianran naturally became a lot happier. After all, it definitely felt good to see how 6 powerful Class 9 soul engineers were obedient to one's orders. This was what was so great about ruling the world. Following which, all of them downed the cups of wine in their hands. This was something which was extremely common at banquets and dinners. However, no one noticed how an inconspicuous vortex had formed in their cups when they brought them to their lips. That little vortex was dark blue, and was definitely very hard to notice, especially when it was formed within the dark red wine. Grape wine tended to be a little sour and sweet. However, all of them found the wine a lot more chilled than usual. It was a very different sensation from what they were used to. It was extremely refreshing. I don't know if it's because I am drinking with His Majesty, but this wine is really good. An old Class 9 Seoul engineer remarked. Xu Qianran was startled by his comments. Immediately, he turned his head to look at the servant. How can the flavor of the wine change when they all came from the same bottle? He was very certain that the servant had not changed the bottle. After all, he was so paranoid that he would have paid attention to all of these details. He was comforted by the fact that the servant did not seem to panic after he had turned around. In fact, he seemed a little clueless. He simply lowered his head and asked, "Your Majesty, do you want another cup of wine?" Just when Xu Qianran was starting to doubt himself, he, along with the other 6 Class 9 Seoul engineers, felt something at the very next instant. The refreshing wine suddenly became ice cold. Usually, the wine should become warmer after entering their bodies. However, it suddenly became frozen as it released a chilling aura from within all of their bodies. Shit! A Class 9 Seoul engineer exclaimed as an icy mist started to form around his body. However, he was able to react very quickly. He immediately tried to use his soul power to force the wine out of his body. However, just when he was about to circulate his soul power, he realized that his blood and soul power that came into contact with the wine had already frozen. In fact, any soul power that came into contact with the wine would immediately freeze. It was clear from the fact that it was able to freeze even forms of energy that the wine contained an incredible amount of power. Xu Qianran was naturally trying to force the wine out of his body. However, he was also startled to find his soul power freezing upon contact with the freezing aura from his body. This was unprecedented. Is it a kind of poison? This was his first guess. After all, there was nothing else within his knowledge that could have achieved the same effect. However, he was certain that his wine had been tested by his own people. How could the wine still be poisoned? This is impossible. 4 black figures immediately appeared behind Xu Qianran. One of them placed his hand on the neck of the servant, who had poured wine for Xu Qianran, as he lifted the servant up with his bare hand. Another soul engineer was surveilling his surroundings, as his human-shaped soul tools radiated a brilliant glow. The other 2 placed their palms behind Xu Qianran, as they inserted their powerful soul power into his body. Quick! Spread my orders. Seal the, Xu Qianran exclaimed. However, he soon realized that it was getting harder for him to even speak. The reason was that his throat was starting to become frozen. In fact, icy mist was starting to come out of his mouth. What kind of poison is this? It's so strong. Have Long Xiaoyao and Yi Shishui finally started to exact their revenge on me? Even though Xu Qianran was very frightened, he was fairly composed. After all, there were a total of 11 titled Doluor including him within this room. There was still the mighty Sun Moon Imperial Soul Engineer Legion outside of the temporary palace. Even if the 2 ultimate Doluor were to join hands, they would not be able to kill him so easily. No matter how powerful the poison was, it would not be able to kill him with his current cultivation. He would simply have to figure out how to get rid of the poison after the problem before him was settled. It's useless. Your orders would never be disseminated to the rest. Everything that is about to happen here will stay in this room. The black figure, who was surveilling his surroundings, launched himself in the direction of the voice, but was repelled by an invincible force. His entire human-shaped soul tool was immediately coated with a layer of ice and frost. The entire dining hall was now enshrouded by a faint, wavering light. Following which, the titled Doluor in this room realized that they were no longer able to sense the world beyond the dining hall. What kind of power is this? Even though the 6 Class 9 Soul Engineers found the blood in their bodies growing increasingly cold, they were never going to give up just like this. They immediately activated their protective soul barriers to protect themselves before they moved over to surround Xu Qianran. Their eyes darted around vigilantly as they tried to find out where the voice was coming from. 2 figures started to appear before their eyes of Xu Qianran and the other powerful soul engineers of the Sun Moon Empire. When Xu Qianran was finally able to get a good look at them, he was shocked. Even though he did not know who exactly they were, he was certain that he had seen them before. Why Yuri from Shrek Academy? Xu Qianran's eyes widened as he stared at the person before him. Yes, I am Huo Yuhao from Shrek Academy. She's my girlfriend, Tang Wutong. You must have been surprised by our visit, Your Majesty. Huo Yuhao smiled. Xu Qianran spoke coldly. Huo Yuhao, you're the one who challenged 10 of the most powerful soul masters from my empire and defeated them, right? Huo Yuhao nodded his head and said, that's right. Xu Qianran released a cold grunt and said, I have to admit that you're probably the brightest star within your generation. But how dare you try to infiltrate my palace and attack me on your own? Do you really think that the 2 of you can escape from my palace alive today? Huo Yuhao chuckled. Your Majesty, you must be mistaken. You should be the one answering that question instead of me. An image suddenly formed behind Huo Yuhao's back. Every single soul engineer present was already extremely tense after Huo Yuhao and Tang Wutong had appeared before them. They instantly attacked Huo Yuhao once they saw the transformation behind his back. Powerful streaks of light were projected towards Huo Yuhao as powerful soul power fluctuations rippled across the entire dining hall, causing the entire compound to vibrate vigorously. A few of the sharper soul engineers decided against attacking Huo Yuhao. They chose to direct their attacks towards a compound which was outside of the dining hall. They wanted to create a commotion to alert the Sun Moon Imperial Soul Engineer Legion, which was stationed outside. As long as they could alert them, Huo Yuhao and Tang Wutong would have no choice but to flee. After all, they believed that they would not be able to fight against the entire Sun Moon Imperial Soul Engineer Legion. However, they were shocked to discover how their attacks, which were fired in different directions, ended up flying towards Huo Yuhao anyway. The rays of light that surrounded them started to contort and twist in a mysterious way. A mystical icy blue vortex started to revolve before Huo Yuhao. The rays of light in the room disintegrated into nothingness after they were caught by the vortex. At this instant, the figure behind Huo Yuhao formed completely. The figure was a beautiful lady. While she had the torso and head of a female, she had a mystical fishtail on the lower half of her body. The mermaid had a pair of big eyes, as she smiled at the soul engineers before her. Following which, she allowed her beautiful singing to enshroud the entire hall. At the very next instant, Huo Yuhao's soul rings started to light up. There was no longer a need for him to conceal the colors of his rings. His first soul ring was no longer masked in white. It was presented in its original brilliant golden color. Huo Yuhao's least impressive soul rings were black. However, the most common soul rings he had were red. Huo Yuhao transmitted his low voice into the soul engineer's ears. Spiritual blast. A gentle ripple swept across the hall, as an intense light was released from the bodies of Xu Qianran and his soul engineers. All of their defensive soul tools, which were designed to block spiritual attacks, released a blinding light. At that instant, the entire hall was brightly lit by all of their soul tools. However, that wasn't all. Loud shattering sounds could be heard right after everyone was blinded by the lights from the soul tools. Everyone, including Xu Qianran, lost a spiritual defensive soul tool. There were, in fact, 2 soul engineers whose spiritual defensive soul tools did not shatter. The reason was that they did not even have a spiritual defensive soul tool to begin with. After all, spiritual defensive soul tools were one of the hardest soul tools to make among all Class 9 soul tools. This was why Zhongli Wu was very unwilling to concede to Juzi's terms back then. This was why not every Class 9 soul engineer was equipped with spiritual defensive soul tools. After all, it was fairly rare to encounter soul masters, or soul beasts, who were capable of unleashing spiritual attacks. However, Those two soul engineers, who were not equipped with spiritual defensive soul tools, had to pay for their mistake tonight. Even though they had tried to counter the spiritual blast by increasing their spiritual power to the maximum their spiritual seas could generate, they still stood no chance against Huo Yuhao. After all, Huo Yuhao had just acquired the Evil Eye Tyrant's powerful spiritual soul ring. Blood started to gush from the noses and mouths of the two Class 9 soul engineers after they released a grunt. Both of their bodies started to sway to the left and right as they tried to steady themselves. Even though they were shocked by how powerful Huo Yuhao's attack was, those soul engineers tried their best to retaliate against him. However, it was at this very instant that Huo Yuhao launched a second wave of spiritual blast. Even though the second wave was not as strong as the first, it was equally frightening. Bang! Bang! Two loud explosive souls could be heard as the heads of the two soul engineers, who did not possess spiritual defensive soul tools, exploded. Their blood and pieces of their brains splattered across the floor of the hall. However, no one could afford to show any sign of concern for them. They were already busy trying to fend off Huo Yuhao's second wave of spiritual blast. Huo Yuhao's merfolk duet allowed him to launch his spiritual attack twice consecutively. This made it an incredibly strong soul skill. The merfolk duet was definitely one of the strongest spiritual soul skills Huo Yuhao possessed. It was probably only second to the soul skills, which the three-eyed golden lion had given him. When Huo Yuhao released his second wave of spiritual blast, every single soul engineer present released a painful grunt. They stumbled backward as they tried their best to use their spiritual defensive soul tools to block the blast. However, their soul tools were already shattered. Shu Qianran was the only person who was somewhat fine. After all, 4 of the 11 Class 9 defensive soul tools on his body were spiritual defensive soul tools. On top of that, these 4 soul tools were definitely the highest quality soul tools within the entire Sun Moon Empire. Even though he looked a little shaken by the attacks, the 2 spiritual blasts had only destroyed one of his soul tools. While he was stumbling backward, Shu Qianran's chest emitted a powerful beam of light as it sent him flying backward. Regardless of whether it was in the palace or the temporary palace, Shu Qianran had always prepared several backup plans for him to flee in times of trouble. Right now, he was certain that he, along with his soul engineers, had already entered Huo Yuhao's powerful domain. The only way he could survive under such circumstances was to use the secret passageway under the floor, which was not far away from him. The passageway had been programmed to transmit a distress signal to his troops on the outside the moment he accessed it. Hence, as long as he was able to reach the passageway, there was a good chance for him to stay alive. Unfortunately, Huo Yuhao was not prepared to let Shu Qianran do that. After all, he would not have come with just the fighting power he had just showcased. After releasing 2 spiritual blasts, Huo Yuhao began to unleash his other attacks. Boom! 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 A series of explosions could be heard once again. Just when everyone was still trying to recover from the spiritual blasts, loud explosions echoed in the hall again. However, this time around, the attacks were not coming from outside of their bodies. Instead, they were coming from within their bodies. The frozen blood and soul power in their bodies had suddenly exploded intensely. This was something that caught all of them by surprise. Everyone, including Shu Qianran, had drunk the wine which was contaminated by Huo Yuhao. Of course, the wine was not poisoned. It simply contained Huo Yuhao's ultimate ice soul power. It was important to note that it was exceptionally hard for a soul master to sneak his or her soul power into the drinks of titled Doluo. The soul engineers were all titled Doluo, and were very sensitive to any soul power or spiritual power fluctuations around them. Not anyone would be able to pull off what he had done. In fact, Huo Yuhao had only managed to contaminate their drinks because he had concealed his actions extremely well. Huo Yuhao was able to conceal his own aura and his soul power fluctuations with his powerful abilities. His yin-yang complement soul core's soul power vortex also possessed the ability to conceal its traces. Coupled with his intentional efforts to mask the fluctuations of his soul power, Huo Yuhao was able to release 7 ultimate ice soul power vortexes into their cups without raising any alarms. Hence, Shu Qianran and the soul engineers had ingested his soul power along with the wine in their cups. His ultimate ice soul power was able to conceal itself and explode only after it had entered their bodies. Hence, it was too late by the time they discovered that they had ingested something. The only reason why it could remain obscure was that Huo Yuhao's soul power was now infused with his spiritual power. Hence, he could continue to control the soul power vortexes even though they were away from his body. Now that the blood and soul power in their bodies were frozen in ice, Huo Yuhao could use his legendary soul skill on them. Ice explosion. Even a titled Doluo would not be able to handle an ice explosion taking place from within them. Shu Qianran's plethora of defensive soul tools would not be able to protect him from within his body. Hence, the other 5 people immediately released a cry of pain after explosions took place within their bodies. They instantly fell to the ground and lost all ability to retaliate. At the end of the day, a titled Doluo's body was incredibly tough. Huo Yuhao was unable to put too much soul power into their wine, or else they would have discovered the vortex in their drinks. Hence, the explosion was not powerful enough to take their lives. However, the intense pain was not something they could handle easily. When Huo Yuhao made his move, Tang Wutong also began to take action. She instantly teleported behind the 2 men, who were standing behind Shu Qianran. She released a radiant purple-gold glow, as she unleashed 2 punches with both of her fists. Shu Qianran's guards were all very powerful individuals. However, how could they resist their opponents when they were at the level of an ultimate Doluo? A blinding golden light was emitted as the human-shaped soul tools released a series of explosions. However, none of their soul tools were able to fend off the power of Tang Wutong's fist, which was releasing a dragon's roar. When Tang Wutong's punch eventually landed on their human-shaped soul tools, the outcome was already decided. After sending the 2 of them flying backward, Tang Wutong leapt into the air and flipped around as she collided with Huo Yuhao in mid-air. At this instant, they were like 2 balls of energy. Upon colliding with one another, their bodies fused as they released an invincibly powerful aura. This time around, even Huo Yuhao's spiritual interference domain was unable to conceal their aura. The powerful spiritual fluctuations, which were released by them, could be sensed by every single person within the temporary palace. A gigantic eye appeared in the air. This eye was golden, but its surroundings shone with a majestic purple-gold light. Its frightening radiance expanded at the next instant as small mystical hammers appeared throughout the entire hall. Mantra amidst the void, spiritual tempest. This was one of the 4 martial soul fusion skills Huo Yuhao and Tang Wutong shared. This was also the most powerful spiritual attack amongst their martial soul fusion skills. They were no longer holding back, as they had to achieve their mission objective as quickly as possible. Right now, even if Long Xiaoyao and Yi Shishui were to be revived, they would also choose to avoid taking Huo Yuhao and Tang Wutong's soul skill head-on. Perhaps only the Evil Eye Tyrant would stand a chance against this spiritual attack. Of course, IFS and maybes were meaningless most of the time. The entire dining hall was instantly ravaged and shredded to pieces. Even though this was supposed to be a spiritual attack, it was so powerful that it was able to destroy material objects. The heads of those Class 9 soul engineers, who were injured by the ice explosion, and the spiritual blast eventually exploded after the soul tools on their bodies gave way. They were not the only victims of the powerful martial soul fusion skill. Shu Qianran's guards had no chance against the powerful and intense spiritual attack released by Huo Yuhao and Tang Wutong. This spiritual tempest was simply overwhelmingly frightening. Shu Qianran lost 2 powerful Class 9 spiritual defensive soul tools throughout the storm. This was sufficient to show how powerful their spiritual tempest was. At this moment, Shu Qianran was starting to lose hope. The throbbing pain within his body made it extremely difficult for him to flee. As of now, Tang Wutong was already wielding her golden dragon spear, while Huo Yuhao held his small dagger. Huo Yuhao swept his dagger horizontally as a streak of icy blue light appeared before their eyes. The 10 meters of space around Shu Qianran were instantly frozen. At that instant, the ambient temperature plunged to a temperature which was close to absolute zero. Xu Qianran mustered the remaining strength in his body to resist the intense cold, which was attacking his body. The most frightening thing was how Huo Yuhao had only done this to temporarily immobilize Xu Qianran. Now that the dining hall had been destroyed by the spiritual tempest, the entire area was covered with dust and dirt. When Xu Qianran could finally see what was around him, he realized that the two people before him had transformed. Huo Yuhao and Tang Wutong had vanished. Instead, two familiar pairs of eyes were now staring at him. They were none other than the death god Doluo, Yi Shishui, and the dragon emperor Doluo, Long Xiaoyao. Be both of you. Xu Qianran was no longer able to make sense of reality. He could no longer be sure if the people who were standing before him were Yi Shishui and Long Xiaoyao, or Huo Yuhao and Tang Wutong. If he had to make a choice, he would rather believe that the two people were Yi Shishui and Long Xiaoyao. After all, they were ultimate Doluo. Huo Yuhao and Tang Wutong were still terribly young. Even if he was somehow able to survive today's attack, he would have no chance of conquering the continent if his foes were two Shrek Academy Soul Masters, who possessed transcendent Doluo abilities. He was already very well aware of how powerful an ultimate Doluo was after witnessing the powers displayed by the Dragon Emperor Doluo and the Death God Doluo. As long as he or she was careful, an ultimate Doluo was effectively invincible in this world. Unfortunately, the hope in his heart did not manage to last very long. Xu Qianran had noticed the eye on Long Xiaoyao's forehead. The eye was sparkling as a beam of purple gold light surged out from it and landed on Xu Qianran's head. Xu Qianran's last class 9 spiritual defensive soul tool finally shattered. At this instant, he felt as though he had become naked. That's it. I'm done. Xu Qianran closed his eyes in pain. He knew that his worries had been legitimate. He was simply too weak when compared to the powerful soul masters of the Doluo continent. At the end of the day, an ultimate Doluo possessed enough power to destroy any political power. If he had another chance at things again, he would have tried to get Yi Shishui to forgive him at all costs. If Xu Qianran had the death god Doluo protecting him, there was no way the two of them would be able to kill him. In the end, he was finally certain that the two people before him could not be Yi Shishui and Long Xiaoyao. Both ultimate Doluo did not possess the ultimate ice ability, nor the ability to conceal themselves. Hence, they could only be Huo Yuhao and Tang Wutong. Even though he did not know when they had become so powerful, he was certain that they were the ones behind his demise. Of course, all of this was no longer important. Huo Yuhao unleashed the Merfolk duet again at this crucial moment. A second streak of purple gold light landed on Xu Qianran's body at the very next instant. Boom! Xu Qianran's skull exploded as his blood and pieces of his brain splattered across the room. The Emperor of the Sun Moon Empire was dead. In fact, he had died without an intact corpse. Huo Yuhao and Tang Wutong heaved a sigh of relief after killing Xu Qianran. Even though the entire sequence was within their control, they had actually expended a fair bit of energy and power to achieve this outcome so quickly. Before making their move, they had already agreed to focus on spiritual attacks. Hence, Tang Wutong was not required to make too many attacks. Huo Yuhao was the main fighting force throughout the entire battle. The results justified their means. Xu Qianran had ultimately died under the power of Huo Yuhao's Merfolk duet and spiritual blasts. Streaks of light started to flicker in the sky. The Sun Moon Imperial Soul Engineer Legion had started to gather towards the dining hall. They were now establishing protective soul barriers as they tried to envelop the entire compound within their shield. Huo Yuhao released a long howl as a gigantic black dragon soared into the air and transformed into an image that rammed into the barrier above them. At the same time, Huo Yuhao and Tang Wutong flickered before they vanished into thin air. Even though they were only here for a short amount of time, Huo Yuhao was certain that the Sun Moon Empire's surveillance soul tools must have already captured their appearances. This was enough, as they had created enough opportunities for Zhu Zi. The linked defensive barrier would be a difficult problem to handle even for a powerful soul master. This was especially true when the Sun Moon Imperial Soul Engineer Legion was the one who had established it. Unfortunately, they were now up against two ultimate Doluo. Previously, when Shu Tianran was trying to contain Yi Shishui, he had used high-energy compression array soul tools. This was because he knew that any linked defensive soul barrier would not be able to contain an ultimate Doluo, even if it was established by the Sun Moon Imperial Soul Engineer Legion. This was exactly what happened. Huo Yuhao's morning dew dagger sliced into the linked defensive soul barrier, as he cut a slit in it effortlessly. Tang Wutong raised her fists and made a gaping hole where Huo Yuhao had cut. Both of them darted through the hole and concealed themselves with their imitation as they disappeared into the night sky. All this time, Zhu Zi had been waiting in her room anxiously. She could not help but shudder when she heard the loud explosion caused by the spiritual tempest. At that moment, she was overwhelmed by two different emotions. She was extremely excited. If Huo Yuhao and Tang Wutong were to succeed, all her problems would be solved on their own. She was also overwhelmed by fear. Right now, she had already given up all hope on Huo Yuhao. She knew that there was no way that he would give up Tang Wutong for her. Now that Huo Yuhao had become so powerful, she could no longer control him. In fact, he was becoming a threat to her rule over the Sun Moon Empire. Nonetheless, she really didn't want him and Tang Wutong to fail. She could not imagine what would happen to Huo Yuhao if they were to fail. This fear stemmed from a mother's love for her husband. It was not something which she could control with her rationality. Zhu Zi. At this instant, she heard a very familiar voice. The voice woke her up from the possibilities she was running through in her head. She instinctively exclaimed, Yuhao. It was important to note that there were many servants present in her room at this moment. These servants were all surprised by her sudden exclamation. Zhu Zi instantly flashed a cold stare after seeing their reaction. It seemed as though she was about to kill them to shut them up. However, she heard Huo Yuhao's voice once again. The Zhu Zi I know would never kill innocent people. Zhu Zi took a deep breath as she tried to calm herself down. This was really not a good time to silence people. She exclaimed, I want all of you to scram out of this room. If anyone dares to spread any meaningless rumors around the palace, don't blame me for being ruthless. Yes, Your Majesty. The servants scrambled out of the room. Zhu Zi hastily called out to Huo Yuhao, Yuhao. Are the two of you all right? At this instant, a series of loud rumbles could be heard from outside the room. Initially, it sounded as though there were a few flashes of lightning across the sky. However, they soon grew in intensity, as they gave off the impression that a huge storm was brewing above the temporary palace. The chain explosion Zhu Zi had mentioned to Huo Yuhao had finally started. The comprehensive surveillance system established by the aerial surveillance soul tools was starting to lose its coverage. At the very next instant, Huo Yuhao and Tang Wutong appeared before Zhu Zi. Now that the surveillance soul tools had been destroyed, they no longer had to worry about being noticed. After seeing how Huo Yuhao and Tang Wutong were safe and sound, Zhu Zi heaved a sigh of relief. At the same time, she was overwhelmed by a complex emotion. Both of you, Zhu Zi instinctively spoke. However, she stopped as she found herself at a loss for words. Huo Yuhao nodded and said, We have succeeded. Shu Tianran is dead. I detonated his head with my spiritual attack. The 10 people who were protecting him are also dead. Now, we can retreat after fulfilling our promise to you. It is now your turn to fulfill your end of the promise. Zhu Zi was elated after hearing what Huo Yuhao had told her. Her body started to tremble in excitement as she exclaimed, Dead. He's really dead. Even though she refused to admit it, Shu Tianran had always been one of the biggest worries on her mind. Huo Yuhao stared at Zhu Zi as various thoughts ran through his mind. Zhu Zi, after we part ways today, we might not meet again if you fulfill your end of the promise. Take care of yourself. Huo Yuhao sighed. At the end of the day, the lady before him was the first female to open up his heart. There was also a period of time when he had hoped that she would change her mind. However, they ultimately were not fated to be together. Huo Yuhao was naturally able to sense the regret in Zhu Zi's heart. However, he knew that they could not turn back time. It was impossible for them to start over again now that they had missed the opportunity to do so earlier. He already had Tang Wutong, and was incapable of loving another person. In addition, he knew that Juzi would never be able to give up on what she had now. She wanted to fight for power for her son, and for the hatred in her heart. Huo Yuhao had already managed to secure 10 years of peace for the Doluo continent to recover, and develop the necessary capabilities to try and defend against the Sun Moon Empire. He was not sure what would happen after those 10 years. Just as he had said, this was possibly the last time he would see Juzi. After this, he would try to push for the rank of ultimate Doluo. Following which, he would aim to enter the God realm. If he was lucky enough to succeed, he would no longer be able to intervene in the Doluo continent's affairs. Nonetheless, he was still very confused about the feelings he had for the God realm. He had no idea what that world would be like. After hearing his words, Juzi's face turned very pale. "Why? What are you planning to do?" Huo Yuhao sighed and said, "Just as I mentioned to you before, Wutong and I will be going into closed-door cultivation. We have become too powerful in too short an amount of time for our bodies to adjust. It's time for us to consolidate the power we have gained. I have no idea how long we will be cultivating, but I don't think we will meet in the foreseeable years ahead. Nonetheless, I really hope that you will fulfill your end of the promise. If not, I won't hesitate to kill you with my bare hands." After finishing his sentence, Huo Yuhao stared into her eyes before he turned around and held Tang Wutong's hand. Following which, both of them vanished into thin air before her eyes. Tears started to stream down Juzi's beautiful face, as her body started to tremble vigorously. Did he leave just like this? At that instant, she felt that she had really lost him forever. This could really be the last time she saw him. Is this really the end? Is that it? Juzi, why? Why did you make such a foolish decision back then? If you had chosen him back then and let go of all your hatred, you would have been a lot happier. Is revenge really that important? Is power really so important? Ha 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 ha. Juzi laughed at herself as tears continued to flow uncontrollably from her eyes. The servants who were waiting outside of the room could not help but shudder. Suddenly, a group of people rushed towards Juzi's room. "We are here to see Her Majesty. This video will end here.